Thank you, Irvin. I'd like to thank the organisers for inviting me here on this very important conference and giving me the opportunity to participate and also to chair, which is quite unusual for me. Normally I'm the person doing most of the talking. Yesterday I was the moderator. What I want to do today is just share with you some of the highlights, some recommendations, and also some personal lessons that I've shared in this field over the last 5 to 7 years. Yesterday the session, which was Other Communities, a look at history and lessons learned, was a truly distinguished gathering of members from different faiths and different communities. One of the highlights and one of the things for me certainly was Father Hoffman, who shared with us that there is a very, very strong commitment within the Catholic Church directly from the Holy See himself, the Pope John Benedict, and really this focuses on combating anti-Semitism and making a reconciliation with the Jewish community. And this was an adamant declaration that anti-Semitism has no place in the Catholic Church, and I think that's a good move, and I think something that's very important because the Pope has the moral authority to actually drive that through the community. Furthermore, we had a very interesting and a very uplifting example of how persistence really does pay, and a great example of that is within the Canadian Jewish community, going from how the boats were turned away during World War II to really being the leading community and influencing major pieces of legislation. For example, the Human Rights Code, which was something that was really led by the Jewish Labour Committee and who put forward a vision for Ontario to develop a human rights code. And there have been some significant changes the way that they've been working within the community here in Canada. Initially there was an organisation that they set up, which was the Council for Canadian Christians and Jews, which has now recently become the Canadian Centre for Diversity, and it enjoyed some very good relationships with people of different communities, but unfortunately over the last couple of years there has been a decline in the relationship that the Jewish community has had with certain Muslim organisations like the Canadian Arab Foundation and the Canadian Council of Imams. And this is a dilemma, and this is a question which I will that was posed, which I will sort of come on to in the recommendations of how does the community manage this kind of engagement going forward. We also had two very, very interesting, uplifting examples of work that's been carried out in Australia, New Zealand, and also from the Tolerance Foundation as well. And the key factors for that were really personalising the issue, how to take the issue of morality, making people understand the Holocaust, why anti-Semitism really is a problem and a cancer within the community and humanity in general, rather than just an issue for the Jewish diaspora, and empathy, and getting the messages out through using multimedia and creating and personalising the issue and getting empathy by people who participate in this form of outreach work, and the recipients really get to understand what they should do and how they really have to behave in a liberal democratic society. And there was a great slide that we had where there were some youngsters who had a set of scales in front of them, and on one side there were lots of different blocks with lots of racist remarks, anti-Semitism, weighing down the scales, and youngsters had to come along and put their hands collectively on the other side of the scales to balance them out. And that was a great visual way of getting youngsters to see how they have to come together and how they can overcome issues and the benefits of actually not standing on the sidelines. And now I want to come along to, and also we had a firm condemnation by somebody who's travelled thousands of miles from India, Imam Umar Ahmed Ilyasi, who is the president of the Indian Imams Commission, who basically gave us a firm, adamant declaration that anti-Semitism has no place in traditional classical Islam. And he and many other mainstream moderate Muslims want to get involved in this struggle against probably the oldest form of hatred around the world. I want to come along to some of the recommendations. Some of these came out from yesterday, and one or two of them are personal ones as well. I want to talk about the role, actually before that I want to talk about engagement, and I talked about earlier how there is a dilemma and a problem in Canada at this moment in time, which is probably echoed around the world, engagement with certain Islamist Muslim organisations. And we really need to understand that there is dialogue for the sake of dialogue, there is engagement for the sake of engagement, and then there is meaningful dialogue and meaningful engagement. And maybe we want to spend more time focusing on the latter and engaging with people who are ready to be engaged with. There are plenty of people out there. They don't necessarily have the microphone, they don't necessarily have speak the loudest, but there are many Muslims, non-Muslims, people of faith, people of no faith, who really want to engage on this issue and other issues that affect society, which really comes onto the whole concept then of what type of engagement. Do we still continue doing things the way that we have done them historically from an interfaith perspective? Now, there are probably many priests, scholars and activists in this room who have had some very good interfaith activity over the years, and I personally have had some as well. But I'm a little bit cynical personally, because I've found often that interfaith sometimes can be a time when a lot of people get round a table and say how wonderful we all are, then leave the table and start having a go at each other. Maybe we want to start moving down the road of intercultural activities, looking at ways that we can engage on common issues, like they have done in Canada in the past, looking at things that bind us together within communities, looking at, I don't know, halal food and kosher food as an example, looking at circumcision, looking at a whole range of ritual things that people of different faiths can come together and have some common causes. And more importantly, for me, looking at ways that we can come together and tackle racism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism and Islamism as well. And in terms of the way to do this, I think the coalition has to be broad. The coalition on the way we're going to tackle anti-Semitism, tackle racism, tackle Islamism, because let's face it, the largest threat at this moment in time, the largest purveyors of anti-Semitism is coming from Islamist-inspired political ideology. And the only way that we're going to combat that is to form networks, is to form a coalition of people of different faiths, people of no faiths, come together, make some noise, work together and basically tell them that enough is enough and we're not going to take this anymore. In terms of the role for government and the recommendations for government, I think there are some interesting development certainly in Canada, and certainly there have been in the UK recently as well, and I'll talk about that just slightly, if I may, a little later. But basically government has to look and recognise who the organisations they are that they are dealing with. What do they stand for? What are their tenets of belief? Forget what they might tell you in a meeting to gain legitimacy and to gain your favour, but really understand what are these political organisations that are purveying anti-Semitism, that are purveying jihadi rhetoric, what do they really stand for? And if they are political organisations, which I believe rather than faith organisations, deprive them of the very oxygen that they require, and that is political legitimacy, until they come back in line. And I see that in Canada they've started to do that, and certainly in the UK we've had our ups and downs in doing that as well. There have been some recent exclusions in the UK, and I know in Canada as well. And a great example of that is with the new government. They've set up in the UK an exclusions board, and we've managed to exclude anti-Semitic. I wouldn't like to call them scholars, but people such as Zakir Naik, Bilal Phillips, Hussein Yi, who in the past were allowed to come into the UK and purvey their form of anti-Semitism that really is an enabler on how they get to their end goals. We've excluded them, and I think Canada's excluded some of them as well. But government has to look at the other ways that they are getting their messages into society. In the UK we have a and they're getting into the society through various forms of media, television, the internet, and I know that the internet is going to be a separate feedback session. But the television satellite channels that are out there, in the UK we have a body called Ofcom, which is a government body which regulates who and what is being broadcast over the television's channels into the homes of people. If anti-Semitic, racist, jihadi scholars like Zakir Naik are banned and excluded from coming into the UK, how can Ofcom allow them to have television channels? How can Ofcom allow them to be beamed into people's houses? So I'd like to recommend to the government that they take a look at broadcasting licenses and who and what is broadcasting into the homes of people who are vulnerable, and I think everybody is vulnerable. I don't buy into the whole thing about a profile of somebody who is vulnerable. I think anybody, if the right buttons are pushed, is vulnerable and can be radicalized and can be turned into an anti-Semite. I just want to share with you some of the things that we did well in the UK. This is from my own personal recollections, and some of the things we perhaps didn't do so well. I remember my involvement really in this field from a political sense started just after the bombings in London, the 7/7 bombings, and I was invited onto the government task force looking at how we can find a response to this. And I remember having a meeting with the then Prime Minister Tony Blair, which was originally meant to be a 30 to 45-minute meeting, but we ended up sitting down for 2 hours. And I remember him standing up at the time and saying, "Haras, I have been really going forward with blinkers on for the last 9 to 10 years. I'm going to be going soon, and I want to try and fix this if I can." And he set up a new government department and put in a Secretary of State, a Minister Ruth Kelly, who decided that for the right reasons she would freeze probably the largest Islamist organisation who were boycotting Holocaust Memorial Day at the time from participation with the government. And this was fine, and then we had a change of Prime Minister, and that Prime Minister then decided that he would bring them back in, until they then made a mess of things again and signed the Istanbul Declaration, and another minister froze them out again, and then another minister came in and brought them back. Now we have a Conservative government, and let's see what will happen. But the point here is that there was over the last 4 or 5 years a lack of consistency. I would like to urge governments, not just in Canada but around the world, when dealing with these issues, when dealing with anti-Semitism, when dealing with racism, when dealing with Islamist organisations, have the courage to do the right thing and be consistent. And finally, there was something that was very interesting for me. There was somebody made a comment, I think it was Bernie Farber who made a comment, and he said that what defines a Jewish issue? And he said that Elie Wiesel, if I'm pronouncing it, or Wiesel, if I'm pronouncing it right, he said that Elie Wiesel said, anything that affects humanity is a Jewish issue. Well, I'd like to share with you something from the traditional classical Muslim traditions as well. And this is one of the things that inspires me. We believe that the son-in-law and the cousin of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, Ali, who is regarded in the highest esteem across all the different sects, he said, when asked a question similar to this, that we are all brothers and sisters in faith, if not, at the very least, we are partners in humanity. Thank you.